Okay, good afternoon everyone. Welcome to this MPC presentation. My name is Matt Ray and I am the Product Specialist UK Benelux and also the Distribution Partners for Akai Professional. What we're going to be doing today is taking a look at the MPC 1, also talk about the MPC Live 2, and then we'll talk about also MPC Beats, which is our brand new free software. So what I'd like to talk about first of all is kind of the idea behind MPC. So obviously with these machines we've got a huge legacy, in particular in genres like hip-hop. And of course those were the original standalone systems like the MPC 60, 3000, 2000 XL, etc. And then we moved forwards into things like the MPC Studio and the Renaissance, which were controllers, for which was then the new MPC software. And now we've kind of circled back to standalone, but this time using a brand new processor, some touchscreen capabilities, and then expanding connectivity on the back. So we've got the best of both worlds really. We've got the best of the digital side in terms of how we can connect to the computer and integrate with things like Ableton, and also the best of the old school with all those classic MPC workflows basically. So I've got the MPC 1 here, and let's quickly talk about some of the connectivity here. So obviously I mentioned this before, we have a touchscreen here, so that allows me to go into my browser and then select my content and then look through my drums, just using my swipe gesture. And also, if I'm in a program edit, I can then highlight a value, double tap, and then use the touchscreen to edit those values. Now, on the rear of the MPC, what I have are a pair of MIDI outputs. We've got our main left and right on jack, our inputs on jack as well, with a separate record volume adjust. We've also got 4 TRS CV gate jacks, USB A and B, so USB for connecting to the computer, and then also a secondary USB for connecting an external keyboard, like I have here, the MPK Mini Mark III. And then finally we have our link. Now this allows us to do multiple things. Now we can obviously connect to a local network, but also if I go back to my browser here, what I can do is import content from Splice over the network. Now Splice is an online sample pool, and if you have an account you can hook up the MPC 1 via the LAN cable and then import your content directly into the hardware. So you've got syncing from the cloud essentially, but this time with a wired connection. Now obviously that changes as we go up the MPC hardware, and I'll explain that later, because those models have built-in Wi-Fi. With the one, we're going to be using the LAN connection for that. So let's go back to my main screen here now. And what we're going to do first of all is talk about how we build a beat in MPC, and also talk about how those workflows relate to you, and then how they can then be processed in terms of how it relates to the way you make music, because ultimately we're dealing with standalone this time, we're untethered from the laptop. But we can actually have the best of both worlds, as I mentioned earlier. I can export this then into my DAW, or I can keep this as kind of a studio hub. So bearing in mind the connectivity at the back, I can have external synths, like here. I've got my external USB keyboard as well. I've got my CV gate, so I can have like my modular setup as well, and have this kind of be the central kind of production hub basically. But what we're going to do is we're going to just dive straight in and talk about kind of how we build up beats basically. So on my browser section here, I can go to content and look for my drums or my instruments, which could be multi-sample key groups. I can then, as I mentioned before, download my content from Splice. But what I'm going to do is go to my main screen, because I've already got some drums loaded in. Now what I'm going to do now is just start to build up an idea using a drum track. But then also I've got a plug-in track on track 2 and track 3 as well. And I'll talk about those once we've got some drums down. So how I'm going to do this is I'm just going to use the pads to just play in a beat, and we'll get something going. So you can start off, I've got it in overdub mode now, so when I lay down a particular pad I can just go back to the start and keep adding ideas in. What I'm going to do first is add some swing to this, so it grooves a little more. Let's add in some one-shots. Of course, if I want to edit any of these sounds, I go to Program Edit, and what I can then do is go to my samples, and I can use my screen here to adjust the start and end points. I can warp these using a DAW style algorithm, so it won't apply any artifacts to the sound. And then I can also come over here to my filter envelope and change the filters of each particular sound. So for example, my hi-hat here, I can apply a filter to it. So let's say, for example, let's go with bandpass, change the cutoff. Or I can just go back using the encoder and then switch that to off. And of course, I've got my amp envelope and my filter envelope down here as well. And also I can apply effects individually, but we'll come on to that later. So here's my quick drum idea. If I want to adjust in the volumes here, I'll just go to track mix and then tap it twice. And we'll go to pad mix. And this will give us volume control of each of our individual drum samples. So I'll tap my hi-hats here, bring these down, or I can pan them as well. Cool. Now what I'm going to do is go to track 2, and here I have, using the MPK MIDI to control it, I have a sub bass. So let's lay that down. And if I want to edit any of this sound, I simply go to Program Edit, and I have the whole plugin GUI available from the touchscreen. So I can, let's say, for example, tap the resonance, edit that, or the filter envelope. And then if we go back to main and then switch to track 3, I've now got a synth on this track. But the cool thing here is I'm using pad perform. Now what pad perform does is it allows you to play entire chords on a single pad, or different scales or different progressions. So right now I've got this set up to E natural minor. And again, let's put this back in record mode and throw some ideas down. And again, with Program Edit, if I tap it, I've got all my GUI here available to edit using the touchscreen or the encoder. So I can hit Oscillator, and then go to Mixer, and then change the cutoff. Again, I can use a touchscreen for this. If we go to main, that's a quick idea thrown down in about a minute or so. And if I want to copy that sequence across to like a B section, all I'd have to do is hit the pen icon here and then copy sequence, and then I can choose which sequence in this project to bounce it onto. If I just come out of there. So each track can be made up of either a drum track, as we've heard before in my first track, or if I go to track 2, you can see there's a skip to plugin now, and there's 3 plugins that are available with the MPC series. So we have, if I click plugin here, bassline, electric and tube synth. Now bassline is what I was using for the sub bass sound there. Electric is more of our kind of Rhodes, kind of Fender piano sound. So loads of presets in there for those kind of, hip hop kind of sounds. And then also tube synth is our poly analog model synth. And so again, each plugin has tons of presets. So if I go into my tube synth here, and then go to Program Edit, and then go to the top here, go back, we've now got, you can see here, synth, lead, pluck, pad, bass, organ, and effects, and we can cycle through those. Let's go back to main now. And the cool thing about MPC, and again, this is going to feed into what I'll talk about later about us continually updating the platform and adding to it. I've actually got the pad set up to play a different plugin than the MPK Mini 3. So rather than me plugging in a USB keyboard and having that control everything, or separate tracks depending on which one is armed, if I go to my track strip here and hold shift and arm all of these, and I'll come back to my pad track here, you see with both armed I can play them independently of each other. That's something that we added in our newest firmware update, along with something called multi-MIDI, which means we can layer sounds on top of each other by sending one MIDI track to another. So I could simply go over to track 4 here, and then send to, and then I could send them in from track 4 back to track 3, or layer it up accordingly as I go on. So that saves us having to load another instance of a plugin. I can simply use the MIDI data from one track, copy it across to the next. And obviously when we're recording, if we go back to track 2, you can see all my MIDI events are here. I can choose to grab any of these and move them along the timeline, like this. Move them back. Or I can use the erase tool or the pen tool to draw them in, or use the magnifying glass and take advantage of that touch capacitive screen there. And we'll come back to home. And we also have step sequencer as well. So if I go to my, let's pick an empty sequence here, and we'll just hide this panel. Now if I go to step sequencer, I can then input all my drum information like a classic kind of TR style. So now I'm in my step sequencer mode. I can select a pad and input the information, just using the touchscreen. Go across to the other bar. Get the snare. And then we can draw in our hi-hats and edit the velocity on the fly. And of course, when we have our external synth set up, that means we can also trigger our, let's say, filter envelope from a modular synth using the step sequencer as well. So I could choose which parameter I want to add and then input that information using the touchscreen. If I go back to my first sequence now, you see on a track we can also have our clip mode, so we can launch things in like an Ableton clip style. And then here I can also assign my MIDI data for an external synth, and then also my CV and gate connections for an external synth as well. So I head back to Hip Hop Kit now. And then finally, on the left-hand side, we've got our XY effects, so we can do real-time sort of XY axis inputting effects on the fly. So we're going to do a beat repeat now. So you've got almost like a roll combined with a high-pass and low-pass filter. We can then have just a simple low-pass filter. And flanger. Or we can choose from other effects as well. So let's go this time with the phaser. And if we hit menu this time, you can see we have access to all of our workflows. So we've got our sampler, so we can input information into the line input there, arm, choose a record signal, and then bounce that information into a multi-sample instrument or new drum program. Come back to the menu, we've also got our looper, so for any guitarist, so you could use like an external amp simulator, run it into the MPC, use the looper to jam out ideas, and then pad mixer and channel mixer, and then other features as well. Now a lot of these are accessible from the top of the MPC one, which is the great thing about it. We can get straight to track mix, track mute, next sequence, pad mixer, track mute, MIDI grid, the main menu, and then also things like your erase functions, your full level, and your 16 level functions as well. Now let's talk about sample workflows. Now obviously MPC is kind of famous for this, but what we'll do is we'll pick out a few different drum patterns and then melodic patterns and show you how you can work sampling into the workflow of the MPC, basically. So I'm going to find an empty sequence now. So let's go with number 4. And let's do an empty program. Now what I'm going to do is hit Browse, and then go to my places and go for an SD card, which is actually in the front of the unit here. So I've got a 64 gig card installed at the front. I'm going to navigate to my sample folder and go to classic break. So here we've got some drum patterns. So let's use that pattern there. And let's pick this pad here and load it in. That's cool. Let's now go to Sample Edit and use the headphone tool to preview. There's a couple of different ways we can chop this up to make a brand new drum kit. We can hit the trim button here and it takes us to chop mode. So we can do a manual chop. So if I use the pen tool, I can input these as I go. Let's undo that. Or I can hit threshold, and when threshold is activated, you can see it grabs each transient peak of the waveform, so you'll have very tight chops here. Now if we undo that again and go to regions, here's where it'll spit out 16 regions, but we can also chop those up even more. So if I go to regions and then use my encoder to add some more, I can get even more infinite detail with the chops. Let's take this back to 18. Now each of these I can use the magnifying tool to zoom in and chop things up even further. Let's take that down for the snare. And so if I want to bounce that out, I would simply hit Shift and then convert to a new drum program. Then when we come back to main, we look for our new program, which is right here. Again, we can insert various different effects on each pad of our new drum track. So if I go to pad mix, find that snare, and then hit insert, and then go to, let's say for example, reverb, and hit the tool icon, you'll see we now have the plugin GUI for the reverb. So I can cycle through the presets here. And I can have up to 4 inserts per pad as well, so very powerful. So I can add another layer on top of this. So let's go this time to dynamics, put a compressor on, and again cycle through the presets. And if I want to remove those, just hit the trash icon. And then we're back in the main screen now. So that's kind of chopping up drums. Let's do another little chop experiment now. Let's do like with a melodic thing. So here we've got our original drum chop here. Now on this blank pad here, I'm going to go to Browse again, and then let's go to Samples again, and we'll go to Melodic this time. And here we've got, if we press Audition, like a lo-fi kind of melodic piano. So let's load that in. I'm going to load it onto my pad here. Again, sample edit. Let's go chop. And let's do regions. Let's keep that, and let's go to Shift and then Convert. Hit Do It. Get back to Main, and there we've got our key chops. So let's build another idea using those chops now. Let's just use the key one this time. So I've got a brand new sequence, nothing in it. Let's take the BPM down on this one to 98, put overdub mode. There's track 2 now. Let's go back to my hip hop kit. And again, let's go to track mix. And on this chop here, I'm going to apply one effect to all the pads. So let's go with compressor. And now let's make like a lo-fi kind of thing. Let's go to EQ and let's go to filter. And now let's add a reverb on top. It's a real quick workflow, real quick ways of flipping samples, and again there's multiple ways you can do this. So if you go to sample edit, you've got the option of manual, threshold, regions, and then again whatever applies to you essentially. So real quick workflow, and again completely untethered from the computer in one hardware space, you know. So let's go back now to menu. Now that's kind of the general kind of workflow of MPC Basic. Of course we can go in much deeper if we want to. We can write automation, and obviously we can record automation as well. Now let's quickly talk about the QLinks because that's quite important. Let's go to program edit, and this time let's go to my synth tracks. Let's go back to this first sequence, and let's go to my tube synth and program edit. Now with program edit, what we can do in terms of the encoders is these are touch capacitive. So if I just hold one, you'll see they appear on the right hand side. So I can choose, let's say, QLink bank 3 here. If I page along using QLink, you can see this yellow border appears over all the encoders. And now I'm adjusting the cutoff using the QLink. Low pass filter resonance. And let's page across now, and let's use the oscillator mixer. Now, of course, these change depending on what page you're in. If I go to main now, and I tap one of these, you'll see now I've got program level, playhead, metronome enable, and metronome record. Metronome level, sorry. So these are also customizable. If you go to your main menu and then go to QLink edit, you can change any of these to whatever value you choose, just in the QLink edit here. And go back to main. And that's a little kind of tour of how the workflow runs with MPC, basically. Now, if you think about this in terms of how it can be a hub for your studio, the possibilities can be quite limitless, really. And again, whatever MPC you choose depends on what your needs are and your workflows are. So, for example, there we've got an MPC-1 hooked up to an external synth and then the USB keyboard. And I could have multiple instances of this depending on what MPC I had. Obviously, we spoke about this before. If I look at the reverse features of the MPC-1, you've got your MIDI and your CV and a single USB B output. Of course, that changes with each of the MPCs, but obviously what doesn't change is each MPC is loaded with content out the box. So here, for example, on the one we ship with MVP loops content, we've got F9, we've got raw cuts, we've got tons and tons of stuff, gigabytes of stuff, so you can get going straight out the box. So let's go straight back to here now. And let's quickly use that as a good time to talk about the MPC Live 2, which is the brand new unit. So that's new for this year, along with the MPC-1, and of course it's completely battery powered. So you can see it booting up there now. So what we've added with the MPC Live 2 is a built-in speaker. We've now got 27 dedicated buttons on top of the unit. And in terms of connectivity, again, it's all depending on what your needs are. So for example, here you've got an extra pair of line outs. You've got your phono input now if you're sampling from turntables. You've still got your line in. You've got 4 MIDI outs. You've still got the 4 CV and gate outputs. This time we've got 2 USBs. These could be used for external, like I say, MIDI keyboards. Could be even external thumb drives as well. You've got USB to connect to the MPC software or the computer to do firmware updates. Firmware updates can also be done via USB key as well. You've got your link, but also what changes with the MPC Live 2 and indeed the X is the Wi-Fi. So if I go to MT Project now and then I go to Browse, on Splice, you can see I've already logged into my Splice account and I can pull content directly from my Wi-Fi. What also changes with the Live 2 is we've got SATA drive here, SATA docking bay I should say. Now I can install, let's say, a 1 terabyte drive or a 2 terabyte drive and have all my content, all my projects, all my samples in situ directly on the unit. So I don't have to worry about losing SD cards or USB sticks or anything like that. It's all in one place essentially. And again, it all depends on what your needs are from MPC to MPC. You're not going to sacrifice anything in terms of the software for each MPC. One difference here would be, for example, maybe the Live obviously has Ableton Live Control directly from the unit. These all have Ableton Link, but the Live 2 has Ableton Live Control. So I can tap that, and using a network, I can use the MPC Live in Control mode for Ableton. That's what changes in terms of the hardware between each unit, basically. Now, with the MPC Live 2, if I go to Browse and Load a project, so let's go to Places and then go to MPC Documents. Let's go Projects, and let's go to 808. We've got the addition of the speaker. Now this is great for monitoring your arrangement on the fly, essentially. Think about it as doing like, the car test with your mix or your phone, that kind of thing. It's just a way to see how your mix is progressing using these speakers here, and they do pack quite a punch. Just hold those up to the mic. You get the general idea. There's plenty of bass there. Bear in mind, it's an 808 kick. So really helpful if you're, especially if you don't have monitors, or you're still using headphones, or you may be sort of restricted in where you can mix or compose. It's a great little addition to make it even more portable. Again, we're talking 6 to 7 hours battery life here using the lithium-ion battery. So there you go, MPC Live 2. So let's say I've created something now in the MPC 1. If I want to bounce this out to Ableton, I can simply go to my folder here, and then we've got ALS export. And here you can choose audio or MIDI, include your volume and pan settings, or bypass any effects you've made in MPC right here. Of course, I can also bounce out in different ways as well. You've got audio mixdown, and then obviously using the explode feature in my drums, I can then bounce out individual stems of drums as well. So I can then go to track, then click here, and you see we've got explode drums, and that will bounce out every single drum sound when I come to export into its own individual stem. So quickly now let's talk about MPC Beats. So let's move over here for this screen here. And MPC Beats is a free software that's new for this year. Now it's a free download, as I mentioned, and it's worth checking out because not only does this work with Akai keyboards such as the MPK Mini and the MPK, let's say 249 or 261, that kind of thing, you can also use third-party hardware as well. If we go to Help and then go to Startup Wizard, click Next, and you'll see when I move down to Factory, we have support for other manufacturers like Novation, Native, Korg, and Arturia. And obviously we've got support for Alesis, Akai, and M-Audio because that's part of InMusic brands. If we go to Novation, obviously you can see you've got Launch Key, Impulse, then we've got Arturia, Keylab Mini. So you can use third-party third-party hardware with MPC Beats. And when you set up, it will give you an option of simple or advanced. Now this relates to what windows you see in the software. So let's go Next and click Start Making Beats. Move the eye icon here, and here you can see we've got a slimmed down version of the MPC software. Slimmed down in terms of view, but obviously it's fully featured. If I click here, I can access more of my windows. So how we navigate MPC Beats is we can click on our project info here, or we can click on our media browser. So I can go Program, then select Kit, then choose, let's say, any of these hip hop kits, and that's loaded into track 1. Here I've already loaded into track 2 a plugin. Now we have the same plugins with our hardware as we do with our software: electric, bassline, and tube synth. And again, all your parameters will be down here in your QLinks. And for the synth, you've also got the pad perform, so I can click chords and then choose my scale and my root note, or I can have progressions or scales, or we can just turn that off altogether. And I can bring in these windows in and out however I want the software to look. If we move up here, then we've got our MIDI note information here, and then the next page we've got our program edit. So if I'm using a synth, let's say, for example, we'll have our program editor, and you'll see the full plugin GUI here. And then moving further across, we've got our track strips, and if we go down to the expand icon here, I've also got simply like my sampler and my looper. So here all my samples will appear, and So here all my samples will appear, and then I can choose to edit start and endpoints, and then chop up those samples the same way I do on the MPC hardware. Now the great thing about this is a free software, and we ship with. Now the great thing about this is a free software. It's a free download. It's a great entry point into the MPC software workflow. Now, of course, with the larger MPC hardware, you can use obviously the 1 and the X and the Live 2 to control the MPC software, but MPC Beats is specifically designed for people to get into that MPC workflow on the software. And all those tools then that you acquire can then be transferred to the hardware. But the purpose really with Beats is the case of if you have a MIDI keyboard like the MPK Mini Mark III, you can get up and running and making music free very quickly with some great sounding plugins and tons of drum content as well. And you can also access all of our expansion content and load them in from the Akai store right here. Again, just going back here. Here you'll find your file editing tools section. Or one thing I can do is if I go to help, I mentioned you've got the MPC Beats help here. But if I go to my eye icon here, anything I roll the mouse over, it'll tell you exactly what it is in this section down here. So QLinks, panel toolbar, right here, track type. So yeah, MPC Beats, free download, go and check it out. You can use it with pretty much any and all MIDI keyboards and you can get straight into that MPC workflow for free. So check out the Akai Pro site and check out the download. So that's a quick little tour of the MPC series essentially. So what you have is, again, the main thing here is it's a standalone workflow. And it's doing the best of both worlds, you know, sort of pre-DAW in terms of the MPC workflows. They're classic, they're unchanged, they've been updated to reflect the technology, but they still remain and they're still being tweaked in a way that we can do with the power under the hood and also our software teams, always listening to the forums and the socials. But again, it's a good way for someone who's looking to jump away from their laptop and, you know, get into writing music and composing beats in a standalone environment. And if they want to, they can bounce out those tracks into Ableton and then finish them off, or, you know, tweak their arrangement. But ultimately, it's about working in standalone with this and just treating it like an instrument as opposed to a mouse or keyboard. You know, here we can be tactile, we can grab knobs, we can use the touchscreen, pinch and zoom, edit our samples using the touchscreen, and just be more tactile with our music making in, you know, a nice and standalone package basically. And again, use different kind of hub setup. If you want, you can run in external hardware, you can sample in from external synths, or let's say, for example, a tablet or a phone or something like that, and just generally use it as your production hub. But again, the option exists then to bounce out if you want to, and, you know, finish up your arrangement and add, you know, your third-party plugins in Ableton, all that kind of thing, essentially. So both worlds are covered, I would say. So yeah, that's MPC. And that's a quick tour of kind of how we operate with these different workflows, and hopefully you can see how they may apply to you if you want to move away from a laptop and start making beats in a standalone environment. So thanks for watching, and again, hit us up with any questions. And yeah, thanks for tuning to this stream, and hopefully we'll see you on another one soon.